Our second panel today is Surveillance, AI, Technology, and the Future of Activism. This panel will be moderated by Sonya Stepanova, who is a Toronto-based film worker and community organizer, leading Davenport Aid Brigade and organizing in the Palestine Solidarity neighborhood riding groups. Her most recent project was doing research for a documentary about nuclear weapons, AI, and the integration of Silicon Valley into the military-industrial complex. I will leave this to Sonya. Thank you.
Hello, thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to the panel, AI, Surveillance, and the Future of Activism. So joining me today, firstly, we have Ibtihal Aboussad, who is a community organizer with No Azure for Apartheid, which is a campaign demanding that Microsoft end all contracts with the Israeli military and government. Ibtihal was a software engineer at Microsoft AI, but was subsequently fired because of her organizing efforts, so we know she was very effective. Our other panelist today is Alessandro Delfanti, who currently teaches at University of Toronto, where he researches digital labor and countercultures. He wrote the excellent book, The Warehouse, Workers and Robots at Amazon, and most recently with the Capacitor Collective, Notes Toward a Digital Workers' Inquiry. So thank you both for being here. Yay. So the question of people's relationship with technology and automation has been ubiquitous in the popular consciousness, whether it was the Luddites smashing the machines that they thought, or that was replacing their labor during the Industrial Revolution, or Stanley Kubrick's nod to IBM and computerization with the terrifying HAL in his 1968 film, 2001: Space Odyssey. Humans have been trying to make sense of our relationship with machines ever since they began encroaching into our lives. The handful of companies that have essentially monopolized the business of computing, also known as big tech, have gotten their hands into basically all facets of our lives. And when you look at the speed at which these developments have progressed, it is no wonder that so many people feel completely overwhelmed by it all. And let's take a moment to actually appreciate that in less than a couple decades, it became basically impossible to participate in our society without a smartphone. And now, AI has entered this picture. From discussions about the hundreds of cases of people genuinely going into psychosis because of ChatGPT, or the fact that AI videos just keep getting more and more realistic and saturating our information space, we could have made this whole forum about AI. Today, though, our focus is going to be on how AI functions and relates to capitalism in its most advanced stage, also known as imperialism, which is the most critical question of our times. AI is playing a huge role in all of this, so much so that American national security documents frequently refer to AI by comparing it to the invention of the atomic bomb. This conversation is also taking place in a city that has the densest cluster of AI startups in the world, in a country that, according to the government, is the first nation on earth to develop a national AI strategy. We now have a whole entire cabinet position, Minister of AI and Digital Innovation, which is held by Toronto Centre's Evan Solomon, who is also a member of the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group and Canadian-NATO Parliamentary Association. So yes, shame on Evan Solomon. If we are to seriously take up the question of ending imperialism, and our whole survival depends on our ability to do so, it is incumbent on us to recognize that AI, big tech, this is absolutely a people's issue, and so we have to develop an analysis on these questions and get to the bottom of what is really going on and what we are going to do about it. So in that spirit, I would like to ask the first question. Basically, all of the information that we ever get about AI is either coming from the press, which is mostly owned by big tech, or social media, which is also owned by big tech. So I wanted to start this discussion with just an explanation of what AI actually is. So Ibtihal, as a software engineer who was working on AI, can you please explain a little bit about what is going on a software level and also, crucially, on a material level?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. I think I'll talk about the software level first, but I think the material level is more crucial and relevant to today's conversation. But essentially, like, despite all the sham marketing designed to make us believe that AI is this like superhuman, like intelligent, like version of us, AI at its core is just pattern recognition. Like, it's just making predictions based on millions of like data of data sets, which I'll talk later about even the ethics of that part. But essentially, AI is, you know, trained on a lot of the internet to use math and probabilities to try to predict sequences. Like, it does not understand in the sense that these companies market it. It is not some like super magical entity. And I think inherently, like, AI has been around for a while, and AI was not destined to be this evil technology. Like, AI, I guess like decades ago, or less than maybe like a decade or two ago, translation services, like a translation website that converts your text to another language, uses AI. You know, some medical technologies that have been around for a bit for like early diagnoses use AI. Some like climate institutes use AI to predict, you know, the harms of the fossil fuel industry, for example. And so at its core, what has made AI into this, you know, like dangerous, unethical, harmful technology in this day and age is just capitalism. It's just that the main actors in the field put profit over people every time. And so to them, you know, if there's a way to use AI that brings in millions or billions of dollars of contracts, that's the way to go, regardless of its harms. And so that's I think that's like the overall like software aspect. It's essentially just like predicting patterns. Now, materially speaking, we talked about how, you know, AI cannot exist without being trained on existing data, and that's a current issue is with the rise of generative AI, which is also like abused for, I guess, silly purposes, despite the environmental harms and despite the unexploited labor that goes into building these generative AI models. Like a big issue for Gen AI specifically is how much stolen data it is trained on. And so that's an aspect we've also been seeing, where these LLMs keep trying to these LM companies keep trying to put out a new model version every month or two with no transparency on whose work and whose labor, whose art is being used to train these models. We also have, you know, data centers as a material, I guess, material embodiment of AI training, which, as I'm sure many in the room know, AI also requires a lot of natural resources to, especially generative AI models, to not come to life, because they're not live, but to exist. And that is also something that, like, you know, the building of data centers, the conversion of natural rivers and lakes into just resources for these data centers have been accelerated, again, with no regard to the harms, because of the actors that own these processes. And I think another something else that is required to build a generative AI model that is talked about less than the environmental consequences and the data theft is just the labor exploitation to annotate that data. Because when you have, you know, like, again, a lot of the internet, and you're trying to teach these models, okay, if A, then B, this requires people in the global south to accept like near zero pay to label that data for these, multi-trillion-dollar companies. And so that's another, I guess, like material effect of the generative AI boom that, again, like AI, even I'd say even like a few years ago, there was more of a split between AI being evil and the more neutral uses of AI. But right now, after seeing its potential for surveillance, and we'll go into that, and its potential for military uses, it's just been mostly used and trained for negative purposes.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important point to emphasize, that these tools and technologies do not exist in a vacuum, and the way that they are being used is entirely dependent on who is controlling them. And not to mention, in addition with the data centers, that they rely on resources to like the actual physical raw materials to build them that are also coming from the global south. So, Alessandro, you wrote a book about Amazon, and you did research in the warehouses, not only looking at workers and their conditions, but also I found it so interesting that you looked at the patents that Amazon is developing to see what kind of ideas they have in the pipeline. And one question that you were exploring throughout your research is this notion of technology replacing workers. And this is a claim that we hear all the time about AI. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you learned through your research and just how corporations like Amazon are using this technology?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone for coming out today. So I've been trying to study the futures that big tech companies imagine or desire, and patents are a very good sort of proxy for that, because they sort of capture their document properties that capture inventions that could actually be developed in the future. Not all of them are actually always, not all of them actually materialize, but still they're a window into the desires of these companies, I think. And it's very interesting to see how one of the main fantasies is this separation from workers and from human labor, because workers are messy, they go on strike, they don't show up, they want more money and higher salaries, they get sick and they get pregnant and so on. So, but it's still a fantasy. So a lot of the patents that these companies have actually imagine like a fully automated workplace with drones and automated systems that, I don't know, like load commodities on drones that can then deliver them to your doors when you order something on Amazon. But these companies are also very aware that this is just a fantasy, this idea of separating capital from the actual human beings that made production possible. So for instance, you find like very sort of explicit moments where these companies in patents admit that. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, believe me, this is more or less the quote. From a patent imagining a fully automated warehouse system. Robots are cool, but human beings are cheaper and more flexible. So human labor still remains easier to exploit, cheaper, easier to discard, just necessary for a lot of tasks that can never be automated. So I don't know, but I don't know what's going to happen 100 years down the line. But the present and the near future, for sure, all these companies are very much aware that it's still about exploiting human labor. Maybe you can put it like hide it, put it further away, make sure you can control it more easily, and so on. They also have, also a lot of the patents that I've been reading, not just from Amazon, but also from Meta and Tesla and other big tech companies, also sort of like explain the ways in which they imagine humans, just like providers of tasks. So in a lot of the patents, like, the human body is fragmented. The patent only shows one finger, and the user is called actuator, but all they're interested in is the finger clicking on something and, basically generating data that are actually interesting and valuable for these companies. And then, of course, there is the fantasy of the sort of continuous accumulation of property, or the infinite expansion of property. So there are patents that automate the process of patenting itself. So the idea is you can just tell an AI system, just write 100 or 200 patents for me in this general area of technology, and these systems will actually sort of crunch out patents you can use to sort of control larger swaths of technological land in the future. So very interesting for me that while a lot of these companies kind of started out by providing this sort of a promise of democratic access to information, horizontal communication and so on, they're now basically explicitly saying it's all about concentrating money and power. Just to wrap this up, I was at a conference, a big AI industry conference in Montreal last fall, and one of the things they were discussing is the idea of the first, just trying to bet on when we will have the first $1 billion company made of a single human being, just working with agents, so AI systems. So just a fantasy of extreme concentration of wealth and power.
What a beautiful and inspiring vision they have. So creative. So Ibtihal, you were working at Microsoft, working on software for translations, and then you found out, not through your employer or anything, you found out that your work was directly being used to carry out the genocide in Palestine. Can you just kind of, I think we hear a lot about this being an AI-assisted genocide, but can you actually explain a little bit how that works, what that looks like?
Yeah, I think to start, I'll just say, none of this is speculative because actual IOF officials and top Israeli commanders have said, thank you, Microsoft, we would not have been able to carry out the genocide. Well, they did not call it a genocide to this scale without this technology. We have actual quotes from the Israeli army and government about how much technology is just making it easy for them to just kill thousands a day. And so I'll give a brief overview of how exactly concretely this works. I think it's no secret to any of us now that every aspect of Palestinian life is surveilled, whether you're in Gaza, whether you're in the occupied West Bank. The occupation just collects data on Palestinians' literal every move. And the reason I say it literal is if you cross a checkpoint from one area to another, that is data that is collected, including with what you were wearing at that time, your face and everything. And phone calls are being intercepted and collected, text messages, social media posts, location changes, literally every single aspect of Palestinian life. But where these companies come into place, there's the cloud aspect, which is that without Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and these other storage providers, the Israeli military and government would not even be able to store this data. This requires servers that these companies, have created custom contracts to provide to Israel, custom contracts with more storage, I'd say, than for a regular customer. And besides the storage aspect, having all this data is not as useful if you're not using big tech tools to sort of analyze it and synthesize it and just decide, okay, this journalist that we're targeting seems to, we'll go to this area at 6 p.m. today based on all these data sets that we've collected, and then using AI as well, the decision is made to target that area and murder that journalist. And so essentially where AI comes into place is allowing the Israeli military and government to just convert these millions of terabytes of data into actual strikes on the ground. And so something I want to highlight or emphasize is the Israeli army will use this sort of as an excuse at times that, it's the AI model that made a mistake and we had a strike on, these 400 civilians and to try to absolve the humans that are behind this genocide of the responsibility and blame the machine. But what I want to emphasize is that would only matter if this was, if we knew that this was not an army committed to committing a genocide. Israel would kill everyone in Gaza if they could, regardless of tech assistance. And so I think it's important to highlight it's not only the technology that as they like to claim, it's not the technology that's making it a genocide. It's the humans behind it. One thing I also wanted to mention is, oh, sorry, I thought someone was saying something. One thing I also wanted to mention is, like, this is not just, you know, we hear a lot about Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, but there's a lot, essentially at this point, most big tech companies see a lot of money in contributing to this genocide, and so many of them are backing Israeli-made applications and tools to accelerate this genocide. I think one horrifying example that is backed by Palantir Technology is this tool called Where's Daddy, created by the Israeli military, and which, as the name hints, allows the Israeli military to know when a target, which could be anyone in Gaza, is going home, so that they can kill them and their entire family in the process. And so it essentially analyzes that data that's surveilled to try to predict when is the best time to strike someone in their home versus outside. There's so many other tools, like I won't go into detail into all of them, but like at this point, and I think that will come later in the discussion, but it's important to keep in mind that we can't, it's been shown that the way to change this is not to try to appeal to these companies on moral grounds. Like, again, as I've mentioned earlier, it's gonna remain profit over people. And it's the way we can, like, resist this and fight this is not through trying to appeal to, you know, their ethics or their emotions. It's through other means, which we'll go into. But the reason why this has been an AI-assisted or AI-powered, honestly, genocide, and the reason why the occupation has been tech-assisted for decades now, whether through surveillance, whether through, you know, just restricting the movement of Palestinians based on this tech, is, again, because we are in this imperialist, capitalist world where, you know, contributing to the occupation pays, and that's what these companies prioritize.
Thank you. I did print out this quote because I thought it was so noteworthy just to illustrate. This is from Benjamin Netanyahu, and he said that Israel and Microsoft are a marriage made in heaven but recognized here on earth. And I think this is such an important point to keep in mind when we're also just trying to understand why countries like Canada are so invested in their relationship with Israel, is because there is this constant exchange of information, technology, different surveillance tools that we see all around the world. And companies like Microsoft and Amazon that also produce, you know, cloud services or commercial things, they have actually always been deeply entangled with the military-industrial complex. And I also just wanted to say, I read this book, Ash Carter, the Obama's Secretary of Defense, in 2001, he wrote a paper saying, tomorrow's defense innovations will largely be derivatives of technology developed and marketed by commercial companies for commercial motives. And this just collection of data is such an important part of how these companies function. And I think pointing out that a lot of this really is about accountability, and the ability to just say, oh, well, the algorithm did it, is critical, especially when we have Israeli officials saying directly on the record that it's actually not about accuracy, it is about destruction. So thank you for that.
Sorry, can I add one last thing? Yeah, I think another, you know, counter argument that these companies will try to use, and especially Microsoft, is, and this is a quote or like example from the Microsoft AI CEO, where he was like, well, you know, it's like if you're manufacturing like tissues and someone buys your pack of tissues to do bad things with it, like, it's not your fault or it's not up to you. And I think it's important to also highlight that almost all of these contracts with the Israeli military and government, or all of them actually, are custom. Like this is, like we even had like the Microsoft CEO like try to brag about how it only took a 9-minute meeting to finalize the contract with Unit 8200, which is the surveillance unit of the IOF. So like we have through, whistleblowers at all these companies, through seeing internal contracts, through the quotes of these executives and the quotes of Israeli officials, we know that this is not, just putting, like we're just putting a model out there, and the IOF uses it in these bad ways, but there's nothing on us. Like it takes actual, the biggest client of Microsoft's consulting services is Israel. Like it actually takes a lot of customization and intentional complicity.
So both Amazon and Microsoft are playing a critical role in just the acceleration of capitalism in general. These are massive corporations, and it is through their ability to gather so much data that they are able to see every single opportunity for profit and exploitation. So their actions point to just total contempt for humanity, and yet the optimistic vision of the future is very often based on these notions of tech utopianism, techno-optimism, and even people on the left can sometimes speak with this framing. And I think it's really important to identify this because this whole struggle for liberation is shaped by our ideas and perceptions. And if these tech companies are projecting this impotence and people are just taking it at face value, it obscures the fact that actually, no, we really can resist against this. And we already touched on this earlier, so I wanted to actually get into it in more detail now. We know that people have been resisting against this, and I wanted to ask you both, this is kind of a two-part question. Firstly, can you talk to us a little bit about the resistance that is happening by the workers inside these companies?
Okay, yeah, I'll mention. So as I was like hinting at in the earlier conversation or question, like first I want to emphasize that none of us are like disillusioned or delusioned, like have this delusion that these companies can change their minds based on like, our appeal to their humanity or, emotions or morality. And so what has been effective in some cases is just from within the company, from within the workers inside these companies, making it costly to actually do business with the military or with the IOF or with the Israeli government. So there comes a point where that equation of profit over people, like there comes a point with enough worker power, with enough labor organizing, the profit aspect might, like if you're imagining a scale and this is the profit from having XYZ contract and this is the loss, it is possible with labor organizing to tip it such that it makes these companies reconsider these contracts. An example I'll give is after having so many escalations through No Azure for Apartheid, which is the worker-led campaign fighting Microsoft's complicity, there were disruptions of every conference Microsoft had in 2025 in North America. There was an encampment at Microsoft's HQ. There were sit-ins at the offices of executives. After like this persistent escalation, and actually 2 weeks after the sit-in in Brad Smith, who's the president's office, Microsoft decided to cancel their contract with Unit 8200, which is like a surveillance contract, as I mentioned. And obviously in their framing, it comes as, we investigated ourselves, and we also investigated ourselves last year and found no wrongdoing, but something changed right now, and we just figured out that now this is bad. But like the timeline and the investigative journalism as well that happened around that time clearly points to the effect of like mass pressure from workers and investigative journalists and BDS as well. So I think I mentioned this example to just highlight, this did not occur because any of the executives changed their minds about the morality of this, but it's important to realized that from within the belly of the beast, which is these companies, the more workers resist and, you know, sometimes even like put their job on the line and just organize and leak documents and just take part in labor organizing in different forms, that it can actually have like a material impact on these contracts at times. And I think for a lot of people, it just seems like such an overwhelming feat. Like you think like, you know, Microsoft has like 100,000 employees, just like in North America. Like what's a group of like 30 or 50 people gonna do? But we've, again, like we've seen throughout history that labor organizing can, you know, tip the scale in that equation. And so if it's one person or two people, like they can have doubts about the, I guess, effectiveness of the organizing, but that's where it's important to try to unionize, try to form groups that don't operate within the company, like you know, approved like affinity or cultural groups, but groups that are okay going against, you know, the methods that the company prefers.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of those groups actually sort of blossoming, especially in North America in the last few years, like No Tech for Apartheid, Tech Worker Coalition, Amazon Workers for Climate Justice, you name it. If you're interested, like each and every one of these companies actually has sort of created a group of workers going against some of the politics of these companies, and also there are groups, collectives or worker-led organizations that cut across the industry, including cutting across, you know, not just engineers. Like if you look at tech workers, the Tech Worker Coalition, for instance, you have chapters in Toronto too. They really try to organize everyone from engineers to cleaners within the tech campuses in Silicon Valley, for instance. So those are very interesting examples for me of the ways in which worker power can actually be organized and directed against some of these companies. There's historical precedent. I was thinking about Polaroid workers mobilizing against the company during apartheid. The apartheid era in South Africa. So there was this group of workers called the Polaroid Revolutionary Workers Movement, I think, that actually between the 70s and 80s kind of was one of the very first groups to actually push for a boycott of a company because of ties with the South African apartheid regime. And they were successful in actually forcing eventually, after years of struggles, to forcing Polaroid to pull out of South Africa. Polaroid was actually providing, so this is the big connection. Polaroid was providing special flashlights and film to better capture black skin. Like cameras they were normally tested and on white skin, so they weren't good in terms of capturing black skin. So they provided special equipment that could actually be used to capture images of the black population for surveillance purposes, of course. So Polaroid was directly involved in something similar to what Microsoft and some of these companies are doing right now. So interesting historical examples too, I want to say, of how workers can actually leverage their power within a company.
Yeah, I really recommend people read the letter that was issued by No Azure for Apartheid calling for a workers' intifada, where you sort of issue a call to action to all workers to mobilize, because ultimately I think with tech especially, a lot of these jobs are, you know, high paid salaries. There's this idea that this sector is unorganizable, which is just not true, because who does the labor if it's not the workers? So of course it is organizable. So now I wanted to ask, outside of labor organizing, I'm sure there are people in the audience here who are wondering what they can do.
Yeah, I think one thing I also wanted to mention on this point is, like, I think now more than ever, there's so much intersectionality in this organizing because, for example, our campaign and the contracts that we were fighting have led us now to create a subgroup that's No Azure for ICE, because it's literally like the same technology that Microsoft is also selling to ICE in the US. And broadly speaking, you know, a lot of the technology, and this is to highlight why it's important to resist these contracts and this complicity. A lot of this technology gets marketed as battle tested to our police departments in here, in the US, in Europe, a lot of this technology then goes on to surveil us, even at like protests or at airports. And so I think there's like a growing awareness that when you're organizing against, you know, these contracts with the IOF, that you are also fighting against, you know, the war machine with its, you know, its feet in every part of the world. And so for like non-workers, I think one thing is to not underestimate, like I'll say as a first point, to not underestimate the power of BDS, of boycotts, divests, and sanctions. Like I'll give as an example that there was like a shareholder resolution of people that have stocks in some of these companies that like, what's the technical word? Like they had this resolution, actually, like they proposed this resolution at like the annual general meeting of some of these companies to essentially say, we're gonna take our money out unless you stop powering a genocide. There's been like a clear link between when BDS's campaign against, you know, some of these companies took place, and then some of the concessions that big tech companies made. And we have internal documents or like internal proof that there is a concern from executives around boycott sentiment from individual users or enterprise users. So I think what that looks like concretely is, I know in some places and some orgs, for example, there's people that lead migration sessions where they help you essentially de-big techify your life and move off big tech tools to just use more open source software, for example, and contribute to that boycott. I think, like, sometimes we think, like, what's this gonna do when, like, they have, like, millions of dollars of contracts anyway with the Pentagon and this and that. But again, like, the internal data does show that there is a concern over, like, reputation or, you know, how good these companies are, especially for example, Microsoft and Google that have been historically trying to paint themselves as like the good ones in big tech. Like it does help tip that scale that I was trying about when there's like reputational damage because of these boycotts. I think beside that, like there's potential to organize against these companies even from the outside. For example, against the creation of like data centers. Like a lot of those efforts are not led by workers because they're like all around the world. Even, for example, I know when like Toronto hosts like some of these big tech like conferences, there's community efforts to disrupt and continue that effort of essentially, you know, wherever you are, we're not gonna let you go on with business as usual. And so I think within our separate like organizing groups and our own like separate collectives that are not worker-led, it's still important to not just think of like the politicians or you know, yeah, like the MPs and the local folks, but also these companies that come to our cities and continue, you know, trying to exploit labor and exploit natural resources for evil.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could add that from a social movement sort of viewpoint. It's interesting to, I think we need to debate, we need to discuss whether we can keep using commercial services that come with all the problems in terms of surveillance, data, this, you know, stealing our data, also collaborating with entities we don't like. I think the sort of tech utopianism that you mentioned was also very much present in social movements. There was a phase also a few years ago, if you remember, for instance, the revolution in Egypt in 2011, where people were just carrying signs saying Facebook, because of course social media were an important tool for like democratic communication beyond the capacity of the state to actually control and survey those communications. I wonder if that's still the case. In Italian social movements, like just referring back to my old country, we have this saying, you have to be within and against, like you have to live within the beast and like accept the contradictions, but also use your position there to fight. I wonder to what extent this is still possible. I wonder if we have to go back to a situation where we need to reimagine our media And this is something we did as social movements. If you remember Seattle in 1999, that was the rise of indie media, which was for years competing with like mainstream media in terms of not just like capacity to reach like broader audiences, but also capacity to imagine a new way to communicate with each other. So I just wonder whether at this point we can still like accept the contradictions and work with these tools, or whether we have to just like log out and reimagine something completely different. Maybe we can do that together in the Q&A. I don't know.
You're teasing the next question a bit. But no, I just really also wanted to highlight what you were saying about the executives and protests. I don't think I've read a single book by any of these tech people where they do not go on at least one tangent talking about how much protests bother them and how it's difficult and how the employees are ungrateful, et cetera, et cetera. So it is always worth doing. So we do have 10 minutes left, so I will ask this question and then we can move on to a little Q&A. But I wanted to actually just ask about political horizons and what we are working on achieving through our organizing with the proliferation of this technology and our reliance on it, which, yeah, that's also questionable. I wanted to firstly ask you, in your estimation, what are some specific policies that need to be implemented immediately? And then more broadly, do you see an emancipatory version of these tools and technologies?
I don't think there is an emancipatory version of these tools and technologies. I think we need to reimagine them, like I was saying. So I think we need to start from, we did that 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Movements were very good at you know, sort of like working with radical engineers to actually build some of the tools that were then co-opted by capital. I mean, indie media people actually went and worked for Twitter, and Twitter is actually you know, sort of modeled after indie media. So there is always this movement of, you know, creating something new, and then you know it's going to be co-opted and captured, and you have to move on and do something new again. So I think unless we imagine decentralized tools that can be subject to like radical democratic control by communities, and tools that can compete with the digital technologies that these companies are providing now that come with all the problems, I don't think we can actually advance much in terms of our politics in that sphere. So I really think it's time again to reimagine technology in a different way.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. Like, I think, as I've mentioned, like, the bottom line is never going to change for these companies. So we can try to sabotage, and we can, you know, make it, again, costly to uphold this principle of prioritizing profit. But in our own use and for the sake of even like our organizing, like, there's no, I think there's this sense among, which is intentionally fostered by these companies, there's this sense that like, no alternatives can compete with these like places. Like, people are always like, yeah, like, you know, I could create like my own social media like app or like my own tool, but it's not gonna make it. And I think we have to dare to you know, imagine, as you were mentioning, that there's so many of us that are discontent with big tech that we can actually have these alternatives thrive and become like commonly used. I think like one small concrete example is like Upscrolled. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but after TikTok was acquired, a lot of people became even more disillusioned with big tech social media apps, and that's when like there was the rise of this Palestinian-owned tech for Palestine-backed social media app called Upscrolled that I think within like a week or two had like 2 million people like join the platform. And I think that goes to show, and obviously like had to go through its own like scaling and like hiring and whatnot, but it goes to show that we are in big enough numbers that we can transition off big tech and just have our own ecosystems. I don't think the way is to just, like right now we just keep coming up with like loopholes to try to navigate them, like, oh, this person is shadow banned, okay, we'll do these collabs, we'll do XYZ, but we should, you know, dare to just get off and have our own, products. Exactly, and actually I chose this photo to illustrate that the internet was
originally an invention of the Pentagon, and it's always been tied up with the military. And so when we find out that they are getting studies after studies that show that all of these platforms and technologies are making people more depressed, more alienated, it all adds up. So now we will move on to the Q&A, which will be brief. I think we're going to do the method where we'll take like 3 questions at once and then answer them. So yes, first question.
Thank you both for the conversation. It was very, very interesting, especially I thought it was fantastic. The question I have for you is a challenging one to answer, and I'm curious what your thoughts is, how do we make people who are uninformed and apathetic or so ingrained in the life of social media, so interconnected on social media, care, and how do we get them to recognize that change is required in maybe their own lives, but in the lives of others around them as well? And I think that's the reason I personally come out on social media. But it's really hard to convince my friends who are younger, who their entire life revolves around it, to get away from it. Even when they know the dangers and all the risks.
Thank you. So that was a question about how to get people who are addicted to social media to touch grass. Okay, so we'll take 2 more. Let's make sure to just keep them concise in the interest of time. So we have one hand here, and then you'll go next.
I work in the activism, so I'm not on very good vibes, but at the same time, it's a very big problem. So I wanted to see if we can go with any ideas for how it can be used for the other side, basically. If there's anything that we can use to balance this power like that.
Okay, and then the third question.
Yeah, I guess mine's sort of a similar question. You were talking before about reimagining how like tech works as a way to sort of compete, not just like creating new tools, but I wanted to see if there was more information or ideas or sources of where to find like reimagining the industry in general.
So how do we get people to care, and how do we get AI and tech to be good?
Yeah, these are very good questions. I think for the first one, I think the disclaimer I'll say is I think as of right now, I don't think we have, I think it is going to be like a progressive process of getting us all off these platforms. Again, just because, for example, like with the alternatives that exist, a lot of people like don't know about them, and then that in itself is like a progressive process of migration. So I think, yeah, like given grace in the time that it takes, but I think in terms of people who are just apathetic, I think sometimes for better or for worse, like what ends up having an impact is just bringing it back to how this is mirrored here. Like a lot of people will be like, yeah, like, you know, like Meta censors, like Palestinian journalists, but whatever. And then just bringing it back to how Meta, for example, will like sell or not will sell, has provided people's data and messages to border enforcement, for example, and that's been documented. Just bringing it back to how, you know, our own people like us in this room have like, you know, witnessed like our like friends' accounts getting taken down because they shared like a fundraiser for Gaza, things like that. I think just making people realize that if you're apathetic, eventually this is gonna get to you, like right here, is I think a wake-up call. A lot of, I think it's what we're witnessing in the US, honestly, where I think a lot of people who are now starting to call out tech for collaborations with ICE, like have to some extent ignored warnings from Palestinians for like years now about the exact same uses. So I think just, yeah, mirroring that. I'll stop at this in case you want to add something then.
Maybe one thing is that a lot of the commercial services we use really suck anyway, so we've got nothing to lose. And yet the addiction part is unfortunately very much there, and I experienced it myself, and I see a lot of my friends and my students and my family members also falling into that. But a lot of those tools are kryptonite. They don't work. They just prevent you from actually creating some cool stuff and doing stuff with your communities and so on, rather than facilitating that, which was supposed to be the goal initially. So I think we just need to be more aware of that. in terms of, this is not a technological point, but I think like the right has been very good at repurposing some of these tools to its advantage, and this is because they can provide, I guess, a narrative that works better with these tools. Like, petty, I have a solution for your petty grievances. I have an enemy. I can identify for you. Can go against them. So but unfortunately for fascism, these technologies have proven much more productive than for the left and social movements. So I guess the point is, like, we need to find a narrative that matches a possible technological future, and that if we manage to do that, then maybe we'll be in a better position.
So
oh, sorry. Just to address that other question, like real quick, I think there are some use cases. Like one I'm thinking of is Words of Justice. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but this is also like a Tech for Palestine backed project which uses AI to facilitate like mass pressure campaigns. Like, for example, if like, say like an MP has shown complicity with the Zionist entity, like Words of Justice will like help people easily like send like thousands of email to that, like thousands of distinct emails that don't go to spam to that MP as an instance. I think to me, like that's an example of like how it's used like within the movement for like mass outreach. I think there's also, like as I was saying, like I think a lot of like climate groups rely on like AI forecasting to demonstrate like the harm of like specific corporations or the harm of like specific like products on the environment. Like, so going back to my earlier point, like I think it is mostly negative right now because of the world we live in, but I think there's potential to utilize the tech more like for our advantage, even if it's not, as you mentioned, like it's not as common right now.
So I did see we had a few hands, but unfortunately we have been given the signal to wrap it up. Thank you both so much for being a part of this discussion. I hope that we provided some clarity on how to approach the issue and demystified some of the claims floating around about AI. I just wanted to leave you all with this quote. We've got a technological revolution colliding with a political realignment, and the choices that we make are going to shape our economy, our democracy, and our lives for decades to come. This was Evan Solomon at an AI conference, and he's exactly right. So now we just have to ensure that the choices we make guarantee that it goes in our favor, and that's why we organize. So thank you, everyone.